me, Waste the Macho Man, with acclaimed WrestleMania for the Nintendo Entertainment System. A leg drop, an elbow smash, a body slam!
WWF WrestleMania from Acclaim!
Ooh, yeah, I want a rematch.
WWF Superstars, released in 1991 for the original Game Boy, is the first WWF licensed game to grace the handheld. And it shows. WWF Superstars is bare bones in every sense of the word. A seemingly single player only wrestling game that gives you a roster of 5 of the top WWF superstars of the time, including the Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, Macho King Randy Savage, $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase Sr., and Mr. Perfect. Sadly, playing WWF Superstars is somewhat of a depressing experience, owing almost entirely to the fact that 3/5 of the game's roster is now deceased. Setting that aside, you have options to go for single falls or compete in a best of 3 falls contest, and you can also set a time limit for either 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or no minutes at all. And that's about it really, so if you're hoping for tag team contests or anything of the sort, then you're out of luck. Being that this is the first WWF video game on Game Boy, you shouldn't expect much out of this initial outing for that reason alone. Gameplay wise, Superstars is fairly straightforward. Pretty much like any other wrestling game, the main goal is to beat your opponent to a pulp so that you could score the pinfall victory. Alternatively, you could toss your opponent out of the ring and beat him so that he loses via countout. But in any case, it all boils down to punching your opponent, body slamming your opponent, and performing a couple other wrestling moves in there for good measure. You could go for high flying moves off the turnbuckle, and if you press select while in possession of a star underneath your meter, you can toss your opponent out of the ring, and I mean really toss him out of the ring. Whee! Control comprises 2 buttons, obviously. A strike button and a grapple button, used mainly for body slamming your opponent to the ground. You can roll about to evade ground attacks, as you can grab onto a rising opponent to pull off special moves like suplexes and pile drivers. Well, there's some wrestling moves in here at least. The combat's a bit flaky, but it's not totally worthless. Most of the time at least. There are a couple minor quibbles with Superstars. For one, it's a struggle to get up from a knockdown move. Most of the time, a grounded wrestler will end up just rolling about unless they really get beaten down. While rolling is a nice evasive maneuver you can use to evade elbows, sometimes you just want to recover rather than roll all over the place. On the bright side though, we now know the inspiration for Hulk Hogan vs. Warrior 2 at Halloween Havoc 1998. Kids, ask your parents, and then bang your heads against the wall to erase all memory of that tripe. The other thing is, control is not quite the greatest. It works well enough for the most part, but when it comes to attempt to cover my opponent for the pinfall, it takes a while to register, and this isn't a matter of having beaten him enough times. Your opponent's meter will practically be empty, and you still can't go for the cover for some reason. Pretty frustrating that during all the time wasted trying to figure out how to pin the guy, he's slowly recovering health, and let's just get this done all over again. Eventually the pin will work, but aside from those quibbles, the only other downside that comes to mind with Superstars is the overall lack of replay value because, well, all 5 wrestlers play pretty much the same way with only minor aesthetical variations in their movesets, and there's only one way of really playing the game, and once you beat the game the first time, there's very little incentive to go back and play it again outside of checking all the possible pre-match promos and stuff, you know, if you care for that sort of thing, but beyond that, there's not much else to do with Superstars. Visually speaking, WWF Superstars actually looks pretty good for the most part. The 5 wrestlers are instantly recognizable and detailed enough that you can actually tell who's who, which is good since there's no color to fall back on and you can't just give them different colored tights as a result. So you can make out Hulk Hogan with his bandana to cover up his bald spot, Mr. Perfect with his singlet, $1 Million Man with his beard, Ultimate Warrior with his face paint, and Macho King with his, well, Macho King. The ring looks alright, the lack of a crowd is disturbing, and presentation is actually quite nice. Each match preceded by some promos and followed by closing comments from Vince McMahon back when he was an unsuspecting announcer known for his canary blue jackets than anything else. These are rather well done, I think, and adds a bit to the game. Sound-wise, it's alright at best and inoffensive at worst. There's a couple tunes that seem to have been ripped from the NES effort WrestleMania Challenge, primarily the main theme that plays during matches, as well as a couple wrestler themes. Speaking of wrestler themes, they sound alright and close to the actual themes. Well, 4/5 of the actual themes. I don't know what they gave Ted DiBiase. It's some weird tune. Sound effects are nothing to write home about, just your usual stock sound effects that sound alright, and that's about it. WWF Superstars is a bit of a mixed bag. Some people like it, some people don't. I'm more along the middle of the road. For a first time on the Game Boy, Superstars is actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's fairly bare bones in terms of content, the control's not quite up to snuff, but gameplay in general is relatively inoffensive, the presentation's pretty solid overall, and at the very least there's some semblance of wrestling in the proceedings. Not exactly high praise, but I've played WrestleMania on NES, and trust me, this is a massive step up from that particular travesty. On a whole, WWF Superstars is neither a good game nor is it a bad one, it's just average fare. Not a bad way to kill a bus ride or anything, but not anything worth coming back to in regular intervals unless you used to really play the heck out of this game way back when. Sadly, WWF Superstars would end up being the best of its kind, as it would be followed up by Game Boy conversions of some mediocre NES games, as well as a version of WWF Raw that's been known to cause brain hemorrhaging. Still, if you want a half-decent WWF game to fiddle about with on Game Boy, I suggest giving WrestleMania 2000 a shot.
While Nintendo 64 owners would get solid wrestling titles such as WWF WrestleMania 2000 and WWF No Mercy, and Dreamcast owners would get a decent home port of the WWF Royal Rumble arcade game before the system was unceremoniously shit-canned, PlayStation owners were graced with WWF SmackDown, the first game in a long line of video games on the PlayStation family that would eventually evolve to the modern-day multi-platform WWE SmackDown vs. Raw series of sports entertainment titles, which would further evolve to the current WWE series. And while recent offerings attempted to portray a more realistic wrestling atmosphere, WWF SmackDown on PS1 opted for a more arcadish, faster-paced gameplay format that generally made the game much easier to get into and arguably more enjoyable than Acclaim's prior offerings. No longer were you shackled to memorizing 10-step button sequences to perform an R-bar or referring to the moves list every 10 seconds or so to recall such combinations. Now all it took was a D-pad direction and a grapple or strike button press and voila! Wrestling holds right out of the box. Want to perform your wrestler's finishing moves such as the Stone Cold Stunner or the People's Elbow? Just fill up your SmackDown meter, get your opponent into proper position, press L1 and BAM! Ripe for the 1-2-3 or knocked out cold by your fierce prowess. It was this simple, clear-cut format that made the game easy to get into and ensured good times to be had by all. And while it's not the deepest wrestling engine you'll find, submission moves don't hold for too long and weight class differences are arbitrary at best, the game flows at a rather decent pace, and in the long run the game is designed with an emphasis on speed and action rather than any semblance of technical wrestling acumen, much like the WWF product of the time. Right off the bat you have multiple match types, singles, tag matches, steel cage matches, Royal Rumble matches, and such. You now have the prerequisite create a wrestler mode, which is rather bare bones. All you really do is assign predetermined body parts together to create your superstar, and the customization is virtually non-existent. They also tossed in backstage areas that you can move around in during hardcore matches, and you can take the fight from the ring to the stage to the backstage area and vice versa, which is something you can't even do in the modern iterations of the series. You also have a dedicated season mode which allows you to participate in storylines. The season mode is at its most basic. You partake in one show per month, usually a Raw followed by SmackDown before the eventual pay-per-view. Sometimes you'll even partake in the house show, which is something not evident in current SmackDown vs. Raw games. And every so often a cutscene will pop up to show storylines whether you're in them or not. Every season you play through, you'll earn new parts to build your custom superstars with. No unlockable characters here, you actually have to build them. There's also rankings and belt records, and you can even defend your championships in standard exhibition matches, which is a really nifty feature that still lives on in some form or fashion in the current iterations. God knows we've used plenty of these all day long. This is a pretty packed game so far, a plethora of superstars, match types, options, create your own pay-per-view, title defenses on the fly, backstage brawls, not too shabby. And on top of that, SmackDown's gameplay is pretty effective and intuitive. It's not overly complicated, it's not something that requires a degree in astrophysics to understand. It's simple, responsive, and easy to get into. SmackDown's visual presentation is a bit of a mixed bag. While I'm not the biggest fan of the Acclaim efforts in regards to the gameplay, the character models and arenas in those games did possess a polished look to them. In essence, it resulted in a cleaner looking game. SmackDown sports an overall rougher looking game in regards to the arena and especially the various superstar models whose textures seem particularly grainy from my vantage point at least. I think this was done purposely so that the character models don't appear as blocky as the Acclaim efforts. It's not bad though, the graphics are alright, but it's just something I kinda noticed when playing this, and even thought this back when the game was brand spanking new. The other deals are the entrances, or rather lack thereof. All you get is your superstar posing and walking while their Titantron videos playing in the background. It's a little jarring, a little disappointing considering WrestleMania 2000 on the Nintendo 64 does feature full ring entrances. Well, as full as you were gonna get on the N64, I suppose. Even Attitude had full ring entrances, so I don't know what the deal is here. Sadly, it's the same issue as SmackDown 2 Know Your Role, although the series would get full ring entrances once they graced the PlayStation 2. But one step at a time here. Spotty commentary from the past WWF offerings have been dropped in favor of arcadey rock music that plays in the background while matches are in progress. A rather roughshod collection of tunes that are admittedly rather listenable and suits the needs of filling the void. In all honesty though, given the choice between generic rock music and generic commentary tracks, I'd much rather have the generic music. Sometimes generic music is more tolerable to these ears than generic repetitive commentary. Not always, but sometimes. The sound effects are alright, I guess. There's not really much to say about those. You have there's no grunts in this, but you do have a ref count and stuff like that, and yeah, it's just fine. Overall, for our first effort, WWF SmackDown turned out pretty damn good and addressed some of the problems that persisted in Acclaim's efforts. Of course, they ended up with some new problems, but those are admittedly minute issues to an otherwise superb first effort. Is this game worth picking up? Well, I guess if you find a copy for a few bucks, I guess you could go for it. It's a pretty good game, well deserving the praise it garnered back in the day, and it's certainly a major improvement over Acclaim's games, which sort of justified the WWF's decision in jumping ship, so to speak. However, while SmackDown was a good start in its own right, the sequel is a slightly better package that we'll look at some other time.
The WWE SmackDown series has been the longest running and the most popular of THQ's WWE licensed games. The first one came out in the year 2000, and in those 4 years, 5 different titles have bear the SmackDown name. The 5th one is just coming out now, and it is called WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. For all intents and purposes, Here Comes the Pain is a lot like last year's Shut Your Mouth. It's got most of the same features, just with some upgrades to the basic features like the Creator Wrestler and the Season Mode. A couple of new match additions, and the one aspect they've really overhauled is the gameplay and made it a whole lot more fun to play, and just generally, it's a much better game. There are 3 distinct changes to the SmackDown style of gameplay for this year's game. The first one is the grappling system. Last year's game kind of started taking the grappling system in a little bit more of a simulation-based style, less arcadey, less focus on speed, more focus on technique. This year they've really gone in that direction by just totally overhauling the grappling system with 4 specific grappling categories. The 4 grappling categories are power, signature, quick, and submission. There's actually 16 grappling moves overall, so it's just a much deeper system as well. The second thing they've done is they've really implemented location-specific damage this year. That was one of the things that SmackDown never really done before, and the way they've done it is actually probably better than most any other wrestling game has ever done it. This is especially useful during submission, so you know where to focus your attacks, and really it adds another layer of depth to the gameplay. The last change is to the reversal system, which last year was just one button, and you kind of had to sort of guess whether your opponent was going to do a strike or a grapple. And this year there's actually 2 reversal buttons, one for striking and one for grappling, and you don't have to guess which direction your opponent's going to do it. It's a much better system, and it's a lot more fun. All the same types of matches are in this year's SmackDown that have been in previous SmackDown games. Hell in a Cell, Cage, TLC match, Iron Man, 3 Stages of Hell, all the stuff that you would expect. This year they've added a couple of new ones, the ever-tantalizing bra and panties match. The other one is the Elimination Chamber match, which was recently introduced by Eric Bischoff at a pay-per-view not too long ago. Both of these matches, you know, they're highly gimmicky, they could be kind of done badly, but they're actually done really well in the game, and they're a lot of fun to play. Here Comes the Pain Season Mode is not a major upgrade over last year's Season Mode, but it does do some things differently and add some stuff that does make it a much more fun experience. You start out at a hub area called the Locker Room, where you can do any number of things. You can jump to different locations in the arena. You can also access the Shop Zone there, which is basically the game's unlockable mode. There's a host of stuff to unlock, classic wrestlers like the $1 Million Man, a whole bunch of wrestling moves for the Creator Wrestler, a bunch of attires for different wrestlers. There's a whole lot of stuff, and you should spend plenty of time trying to unlock it all. This year's season mode features largely a new storyline, though there are a couple of elements that seem like they're repeated from last year's game. It's sort of almost like a choose-your-own-adventure novel, because depending on what you choose sort of decides how the storyline goes from there. While it isn't drastically different in setup from last year's season mode, it is still a whole lot of fun to play and is absolutely worth checking out if you like last year's season mode. This year's Creator Wrestler in Here Comes the Pain is, for all intents and purposes, the same Creator Wrestler as last year. There's more options, there's more different styles of clothing, a few new hairstyles, a few new different, basically just new customizable aspects with the same categories. Same thing with the Create an Animation mode, it's the same basic idea, more stuff, but the same basic concepts here and there. That's not really a complaint, because last year's Creator Wrestler was fantastic. Graphically, the SmackDown games have always been fantastic, and Here Comes the Pain is no different. All the wrestler models are supremely realistic looking. You just take a close-up look at like The Undertaker and just sort of look at the detail that's gone into his face, into his tattoos, into his outfit. It's all superb. Animation-wise, you know, a lot of the animations from last year's game are still in, but all the new stuff looks equally great to last year. Everything moves really smoothly. The clipping stuff, you know, every wrestling game has clipping problems. That's just a fact of life. Here Comes the Pain has them too, but they're not anywhere near as bad as any of the other WWE games currently on the market. Sound is kind of the one category where Here Comes the Pain doesn't really have that whole lot going for it. What little commentary was in last year's game, sort of the very vague play-by-play by Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, has just been completely cut out. There's just no commentary in the game whatsoever. So it's a little disappointing that their solution was just to cut it out as opposed to actually, you know, improving it in any way. If you're looking for like major innovation in the SmackDown series, you're not going to find a whole lot of it in Here Comes the Pain. The gameplay is significantly improved, and they have done a whole lot to really bump that aspect of the game up. But in terms of like graphical presentation, features, all that stuff, it's basically the same as last year, with some minor upgrades here and there. All in all, though, it's still a fantastic wrestling game and is really the best SmackDown game ever. So if you are a fan of the SmackDown series, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't check out Here Comes the Pain.
Another year, another SmackDown vs. Raw game. The latest entry in the long-running series picks off where last year left off, continuing to focus on user creation and true-to-TV action. The biggest new additions this year are on the user creation side, and thanks to good online sharing tools, you don't need to invest a ton of time to reap the rewards. The action itself benefits from some refinements and generally flows more smoothly than last year. There are a lot of little touches that make matches feel more like those you see on TV, but this isn't always a good thing. The things that spice up matches can also make them last far too long and feel like a grind. The game also suffers from many perennial problems, like weak sound effects, problematic online play, and nagging animation issues. While this year's SmackDown vs. Raw is definitely better than last year's, it's more of an incremental improvement than a substantial upgrade. One of the first improvements you'll see is the training facility, which pops up at the beginning of the game. The controls are largely unchanged from last year, but the training facility is a great place to familiarize yourself with how different moves work in different places in and around the ring. SmackDown vs. Raw's controls are largely dependent on position, and getting to know what a character does in what situation will not only make you a better wrestler, it's a lot of fun because you get to do a lot of cool stuff. Characters seem to have slightly expanded movesets this year, and it is much easier to maneuver your opponent around the ring to take advantage of this.
Now, I'm not really a good handyman, but that's one big ladder.
The training facility is also a good place to familiarize yourself with abilities, which play a more concrete role this year. Each wrestler has certain abilities. Using your character's abilities can give you an edge in the ring, but odds are you won't need them much while playing solo. The computer doesn't put up much of a fight one-on-one, and you'll easily dismantle opponents without taking too much damage. It's still fun to wail on another wrestler, but when your opponents do things like Irish whip you across the ring and then just stand there waiting for you to recover, you'll long for a more realistic challenge. When things do get tough, it's almost always because more wrestlers are in the mix. Tag team matches, fatal four-ways, six-man contests, pretty much any match with 4 or more wrestlers ringside is tough to win. Not because your opponents are tougher, but because there are more of them, and they will vigorously try to break up any pin you attempt. This makes matches longer and truer to TV, and your victories here can be very, very satisfying. Presentation-wise, SmackDown vs. Raw continues to impress, with accurate character models and bustling crowds. The crowds still don't look great upon close inspection, and superstars do some strange things with their mouths, but on the whole the game looks very good. The announcers are on point most of the time, and they inject the proceedings with some much-needed drama and flair.
He has just been battered. It's been battered, deep fried, and now hurting from head to toe.
But even lively announcing can't mask the still disappointing sound effects. Fortunately, the game knows what its strengths are, and once again delivers a lot of content. From superstar careers to the road to WrestleMania, there are many hours of fights and melodrama to enjoy. Of the 6 Road to WrestleMania paths, perhaps the most entertaining is the one you take with your created wrestler. There's a good amount of humor and some clever gimmicks, as well as a lot of interesting match situations. Unfortunately, some of your matches have goals that are poorly stated. Still, it's worth it to play this one through, if only to don a giant chicken suit in the ring. The stellar creation tools are back and as robust as ever, with expanded options and clothing customization. Being able to customize your own logos and tattoos adds a whole new dimension, but the one that folks will get the most mileage out of is definitely the Story Designer. This mode lets you script shows over weeks, months, and years, choosing which matchups happen when, who interferes, and who runs their mouth on the microphone. It's easy to create short sequences, and those who put a lot of time into longer arcs will be able to create some epic stuff. Fortunately, even if you aren't the time investment type, you can download stories that other folks have uploaded and reap the benefits. Online sharing is well implemented, but online matches are still a bit problematic. Matches often have a low level of lag that is just enough to disrupt your timing, and the single-player action does a poor job of preparing you for the online arena, where opponents are fast and merciless. Though there are generally a fair amount of games available to join, many of them don't have great connection speeds, and players will often abandon lobbies while the host waits for the match to fill up. Still, if you're looking for some serious competition, you can definitely find it online. SmackDown vs. Raw 2010 offers a lot of subtle improvements on last year's game and includes a lot of new, diverse content. Though this year's entry is really good, one has to wonder how much mileage this series can continue to get out of its current model before there just isn't enough new stuff to entice players to make another purchase. Whether or not next year will bring a significant overhaul remains to be seen, but until then, wrestling fans are sure to enjoy this well-rounded, thoroughly entertaining product.
Here's your winner and the new World Heavyweight Champion, Batista!
Oh my God!
Playing WWE 2K15 on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One is like watching John Cena or The Rock's WWE debut match. You can sense raw talent, but there's also a lot of room for improvement. 2K15 looks and plays great, but it's severely lacking feature depth compared to its last-gen cousin.
John Cena has the benefit of being in his first match of the evening. Indeed, it's a fresh John Cena.
The frenetic pace that's characterized WWE on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 has been slowed considerably, and it's mostly for the best. Case in point, the start of match chain wrestling sequences. These exchanges won't decide a winner, but they can start the superior technician off with a valuable momentum boost. While it's an option that can be turned off, the sequences are enjoyable and tactical enough that I never wanted to. As bouts progress, the slower combat is both a blessing and a curse. Punches and kicks hit harder, and the reduced speed makes it easier to counter strike spammers. The realistic stamina isn't quite as beneficial though. As matches go on, things slow down too much. Weakened competitors slowly rise, crawl up the ropes, and stagger across the ring. It can make endings either exhilarating or exasperating. While I enjoyed desperately tagging in a fresh partner, or crawling to make a one-armed pin, there were many more instances where I ran out of gas early and became more of a bystander than competitor. The new gen exclusive My Career mode is that sense of purgatory writ large. I spent well over 10 hours bringing my created superstar from minor league tryouts to WrestleMania's main event. I ran afoul of factions, and had some singles feuds, but the vast majority of my career was spent in storyline-free filler matches that were only good for boosting stats. I would have gladly done without my souped-up superstar stats if it meant skipping the grind and a focus on just the story stuff instead. Fortunately, 2K Showcase Mode doesn't waste nearly as much time. It's a mostly comprehensive look at two major feuds, the Triple H-Shawn Michaels rivalry that ran from 2002 to 2004, and the CM Punk-John Cena feud that kicked off the modern reality era in 2011. It doesn't quite reach the every match matters feel of last year's 30 years of WrestleMania, but it outpaced the forgettable reactions found in WWE 13's Attitude Era mode. A major weak point of WWE 2K15 is that its roster is lacking in both quantity and quality. Old school talent like Macho Man and Andre the Giant are underrepresented, while even some modern stars from last year were cut, like Zack Ryder and Sin Cara. Most of those who made it in benefit from 2K's new gen overhaul, and many look stunningly accurate. Those who haven't had new gen attention stick out like sore thumbs though. Stars like The Rock and CM Punk are barely improved, and some divas actually look worse than their last-gen counterparts. Physics glitches are pretty rare, with occasional instances of weapons flying away at Mach speed, or weirdly twisting limbs defying physiology only happening once in a while. Improvements have been made in the audio department as well. It's obvious that Jerry Lawler and Michael Cole recorded lots of new commentary together, and they have great back and forth in the 2K Showcase mode, outpacing the duos in previous historical modes. Be warned though, some dialogue from previous years returned, so you'll hear
He's putting those educated feet to good use.
a few hundred times more in 2K15. Even more distressing than the shrunken roster are the cut options. Customize championships, create a story, and create a diva are all history. The WWE Universe mode does have new storylines that you can assign to rivalries, but they're rarely personalized, making them a poor alternative to community creations. Match types have also seen drastic reductions. Some gimmicky stuff like Inferno or I Quit matches won't be missed, but the loss of standard elimination matches and 4-man Hell in a Cell hurts. In terms of performance differences, both the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One bring their best 1080p and 60 frames per second behavior to fights, with the in-ring capacity remaining at last gen's limit of 6. The biggest difference between versions is that the PS4 limits playable contestants to 4 out of 6 people in the ring, while the Xbox One lets you control everyone.
You're never safe with Dean Ambrose around. He can strike from
WWE 2K15 almost meets next-gen expectations. While the wrestlers look amazing and the combat feels better, my career is a slog, and everything else has been done better before. Between the narrower historical mode, shuttered creation suites, and dearth of combat options for bigger groups, WWE 2K15 has lost many of the tools that brought previous entries to the main event.
He almost took his head off with that lariat. Doing whatever it takes to win. Perched high, this could be big. No, wait, nice reversal. No! Oh, he got him! Take a chance like that. Do you know how badly he must... He may get the 3 count right here. 2, 3. Brock Lesnar gets the win.
WWE 2K19, like previous entries in the long-running wrestling franchise, is a good game. The core wrestling does a great job of simulating a WWE match, and the strike, grapple, reversal fighting system is a lot of fun. It's got one of the best and most comprehensive creation suites of any game out there. And the way that it basically lets you do everything that wrestlers do in real life, in the game, is kind of astounding. But those are all things that have remained true for a while now. And while WWE 2K19 goes to great lengths to fix its biggest flaws from last year, it still leaves a lot of long-standing issues unchecked that limit the otherwise significant improvements over 2K18. The campaign mode, or my career, has been a WWE 2K staple since 2K15, but in 2K19, it finally feels like a proper AAA wrestling story mode, complete with voice acting, cutscenes, and likable characters that grow and change over the course of the story. It's brought to life thanks to a great performance from former Tough Enough competitor and current indie wrestler AJ Kirsch, who brings a much-needed level of authenticity to the lead role.
My reign will be about memorable matches, not memorable words, and that will be absolutely glorious!
And for the most part, the actual WWE wrestlers that lend their voice to the game also do a great job, outside of a few that seem like they're reading from a script as opposed to actually acting.
You're certainly off to a hot start here on SmackDown with your US title win over Bobby Roode. Is there anyone you'd like to defend your championship against first?
Unlike previous years that always start your character in NXT, WWE 2K19's My Career mode starts you on the indie scene in an organization called BCW, where you're wrestling out of high school gyms. A fact that the obnoxious commentator won't stop reminding you of.
These two have the potential to go all night, but I hope they don't, because per the school principal, we have a strict 11 p.m. curfew.
From there, you'll get noticed by WWE head trainer Matt Bloom and begin your twisty and windy path to the WWE main roster. From a presentational standpoint, everything about My Career this year is fantastic and exactly what the template should look like in future years. But My Career still stumbles when it comes to progression. Your character starts off extremely weak with a paltry set of moves, pathetic stats, and generic entrance options. As you level up by gaining experience, you can increase your stats through 3 skill trees, which are further divided by different paths within each one. The skill trees manage to reduce the stat overload that typically accompanies WWE 2K's career mode, but you never get the feeling that the skills you're adding to make much of a difference in your character's overall strength. Despite the pain in the ass that is character progression, the overall story and journey of your character as he rises up through the ranks of the WWE make it worth the struggle. On top of that, new moves and cosmetic options are once again locked behind loot boxes, which is a huge bummer. The boxes can only be purchased with virtual currency, and individual items can be bought on their own, but the cost for buying things a la carte is very expensive. For the most part, My Career is easy enough to get away with using a subpar character, but there are a few points in the story where Triple H decides to stack the deck against you, forcing you to compete and win in wildly unfair matches, such as a 3-on-1 handicap match. Rather than coming out of it feeling like a highly skilled beast of a wrestler, you feel like you have to resort to cheap hit-and-run tactics just to survive. Aside from My Career, 2K19 brings back the much-beloved Showcase mode, this time highlighting the WWE career of Daniel Bryan. Every chapter covers a different noteworthy match in his career, with an introduction by Bryan himself that sets the stage in a fascinating mini-documentary style. Once it's time to actually play, you're guided by objectives that have you doing many of the same moves and big spots that actually took place in the real match, with some objectives triggering painstakingly recreated cutscenes of some of the biggest moments. Unfortunately, while completing those objectives is a lot of fun, they don't trigger checkpoints. And with some of these matches lasting upwards of 20 to 30 minutes, it's extremely frustrating to force players to replay all of that from the beginning if they fail near the end. 2K19 also takes some cues from Mortal Kombat X with their 2K Towers mode, which challenges players to complete themed towers, consisting of a series of matches under a unifying theme. These towers change both daily and weekly, so there's always something new to tackle, and they offer a great source of VC to spend in other modes. Those are the big differences in 2K19 this year, but there's also a lot to be said about the plethora of small changes that go a long way in improving the overall quality of 2K19, even despite some of the frustrations of its main modes. A new payback system adds another layer of strategy to the core wrestling gameplay by giving players 2 powerful abilities that can change the flow of a match, whether it be giving a player an instant finisher, an extra reversal counter, a one-time use free kick out at 2, or an array of others. Royal Rumbles are a lot more fun now that you can pick and choose the order in which the superstars enter. Steel cage matches have undergone an almost complete overhaul, with new exit minigames and several new animations that add to the excitement of the match type. Beyond that, WWE 2K19 just seems to embrace a much more fun and arcadey tone, and the game is much better for it. Big head mode matches are hilarious to watch, some of the 2K towers have crazy modifiers like sped up gameplay that do a great job of making each tower feel like a unique challenge, and one of the payback abilities essentially turns you into Thor as you charge electricity to build your momentum meter. As for things that have stayed the same, the core wrestling gameplay thankfully still holds up and makes up for a lot of the flaws in the other areas. Commentary is still laughably bad, and it's still very buggy, but Create a Wrestler remains one of the most incredible tools for character creation across all video games. WWE 2K19, like other WWE 2K games before it, is still held back by a number of long-standing series issues. But with the much improved My Career mode and the sheer amount of content available thanks to the return of Showcase mode and the addition of 2K Towers, it stops the downward spiral the series had been heading towards and puts it back on track. If 2K20 can fix the awful character progression in story mode, clean up the bugs, and work on the commentary issues, this might finally be the blueprint of a championship contender again. For more on WWE 2K19, check out our Ultimate Created Superstar Battle Royal, as well as our video highlighting some of our favorite mismatched entrances. And for everything else, keep it here on IGN.
The pressure of an annual release schedule can be a curse for big sports series. Look no further than the maligned WWE 2K20 to see why. A game so rough it actually forced publisher 2K to take 2 years off and regroup, which got it to the much better place it's in today. In many ways, WWE 2K24 seems like the final form of this new vision. And yet, 2K24 is marginally better than the last two in almost every way, touting small but smart additions to well-tested systems and modes as opposed to taking bigger risks. It doesn't take long to see that the title for Best Looking Wrestling Game is still locked firmly in the hands of the 2K series. There are far fewer wrestlers that have outdated gimmicks this time around, and besides a couple of noticeable exceptions, all of the top stars look just like their real-life counterparts, from their signature hairdos to the details of their gear and tattoos.
The Fiend wants you to let him in, to allow him to get in your head so he can destroy you from the inside out.
Announcers who have special flourishes for particular wrestlers also belt them out here, so this iconic intro now lives immortalized in-game. Referees even resemble the ones that you can see weekly instead of generic stand-ins, which was maybe not a necessary change, but is a welcome one considering they are also recurring characters.
We were expecting a guest referee and we got this.
When you dig past the looks and into its mechanics, you'll need to sift through 2K24 with a fine-tooth comb to find significant differences. The biggest addition is the Super Finisher, which lives up to its moniker as I never had to worry about someone kicking out of one. Though it might take more work than it's worth to build up the 3 stocks necessary for them, since they are still counterable and risky.
Now that's how you put the nail in the coffin.
There's also a new Trading Blows minigame that appears infrequently and unprompted, usually in the early goings of a match. It's an abrupt shift in the action, and any advantage gained didn't feel match-changing, but it's also barely shown up in almost 20 hours, so I don't think it's a sign of the minigame bloat that the series was experiencing several years ago either. All of the other little tweaks are pretty subtle. Weapons can be thrown now, which is a fun and funny way to do damage at range. New tag mechanics restrict non-legal combatants to 1 run-in per tag, heavily cutting down on the cheese tactics. New paybacks help you vary your strategies, and overall AI improvements mean that managers act noticeably more audaciously in favor of their clients in order to help them win matches. From bell to bell, the wrestling of 2K24 is better than ever, even if it's not overtly so.
Steiner putting all of his freakish power to work.
Of the new match types added this year, Special Guest Referee has the most potential for multiplayer chaos, as one player presides over the match and can either enforce the rules fairly or skew things however they see fit. Referees have full agency over when they count pins, acknowledge submissions, or disqualify obvious cheating. By default, there's a system by which the ref's ability to be a lawless menace is regulated, but you can also turn that off and become the worst friend among your group. Meanwhile, the ambulance and casket matches have similar goals. Shove the opponent inside a box that they don't want to be in by any means necessary. The former is easily the better version of this concept, as there are a lot more ways to interact with the ambulance, including using it as part of your game plan by throwing foes off of it.
No! Look out, Pluto!
The casket match feels the most like a regular match with a different way to win. as the coffin just lingers off to the side of the ring waiting for you to deal with it.
Powerbomb into the casket!
2K24 also misses a big opportunity to recreate some infamous moments from this dubious match's real-life history. Meanwhile, gauntlet matches allow you to fight against a list of wrestlers one at a time and are the closest you can get to a fighting game-style survival trial. All 3 gauntlets match types are welcome additions, though being limited to only 4 wrestlers total at any of them means you really can't push yourself too far either.
And referee cuts off the count at 1.
My Rise WWE 2K Story Mode makes a solid return with 2 different tales of glorious victory and devastating defeat for your created characters to embark on. I spent most of my time with the Unleashed story, which mirrors some of last year's themes from the Lock campaign of being a big star in the indies and having to basically start over under the WWE umbrella.
Good luck out there.
The second story, Undisputed, revolves around the power vacuum left at the top of the men's division when current God King Roman Reigns abdicates the throne after a 1,200-day reign to pursue Hollywood. Both are strong and stuffed with content, even if they can be a little over-reliant on lots of smaller feuds and matches that feel more like filler episodes.
There it is! Cody hit the crossroads.
WrestleMania moments, Universe Mode and MyGM have you covered. Neither make huge strides from last year's editions, but prospective general managers will find some neat new toys to play with in MyGM. The most interesting to me were the post-PLE trades that allow you opportunities to pass talent between promotions, wheeling and dealing with rivals to get your roster in ship shape for the next stretch of the campaign. Superstars now have individual ring levels that can be increased through training and regular booking, which helps them accumulate perks like getting bonus quality points for participating in specific match types. These granular additions, as well as new general managers to choose from and a big list of new power cards to shake things up from week to week, truly make for the best MyGM mode yet. Universe Mode felt much more similar to last year's in comparison, allowing you to take a bird's eye view of booking across the entire WWE universe, or drill down on the journey of one wrestler in particular. There are a bunch of new rivalry actions and run-ins you can program into your feuds, like loser leaves town matches, but I think Universe heads will find that things are largely the same here. That's not necessarily a bad thing considering how robust it was to begin with, but there are still key features missing from the days of old, namely allowing superstars to cut promos on one another. That reminded me that there is still plenty of room to improve.
And a new champion is officially crowned. The Fiend has instantly created a horrifying atmosphere in this building.
WWE 2K24 is clear proof that 2K and Visual Concepts have hit their stride when it comes to making today's package better on the whole than yesterday's. While not drastically different, there are enough new little features added to every inch of this iteration to make it well worth climbing back into the ring. Old enemies still have their number though, such as making its docuseries showcase mode feel good to actually play, creating a more consistent tone and pacing in My Rise, and getting more of the current day roster up to the high visual bar that is currently only hit by its most popular superstars. But even with those lingering annoyances, WWE 2K24 puts an impressive cap on a 3-year run of great wrestling games. For more, check out our reviews of the Outlast Trials or Sons of the Forest. And for everything else, stick with IGN.